It takes 3 seconds to ruin a life. I know because I counted. 1. The door of the executive conference room slammed open, the sound cracking through our morning like a gunshot. 2. 12 heads swiveled toward the man who walked in with thunder carved into his face. 3. His finger stretched across the table and landed squarely on me. Genevieve. That was all he said at first. My name hurled like a weapon. My skin prickled. The room, once filled with the faint hum of air conditioning and the quiet shuffle of papers, turned still and heavy. It felt like everyone was holding their breath at the same time, waiting for the explosion that always came when Richard Crane entered with that look on his face. Richard was our CEO, the type of man who didn't just own the space around him, he devoured it. Every movement of his was deliberate, crafted to remind you of your place beneath him. Today, though, he wasn't satisfied with silent intimidation. Today, he wanted blood, $2.5 million. His voice was soft, but the weight of it landed on all of us like a stone. That is what has disappeared from this company's accounts, and it happened under the watch of this team. My team. I heard someone gasp quietly down the table. I didn't need to look to know who it was. Amara, still recovering from maternity leave, her nerves always close to the surface these days. On her other side, Dominic shifted in his chair, his lips pressing into the faintest smirk, as if he had been waiting for this moment. Richard moved toward the massive screen behind him. A spreadsheet filled the space, rows of numbers illuminated in red, columns aligned like bars in a prison. At the bottom of the sheet glowed one figure, 2,543,118. This is the discrepancy. Richard gestured at the number. A sum that has been siphoned in microtransactions, subtle enough to nearly slip past detection, but not subtle enough for my auditors. He turned back to us, and all of those transactions were cleared right here. His gaze swept the table, then returned to me like a hawk descending on its prey. By someone who thought they were cleverer than me, every head turned in unison. 12 pairs of eyes pierced into me. People I had known for years, people who had once smiled when I brought in croissants for late nights or stayed to help balance reports, now looked at me as though they had never seen me before. Suspicion is contagious. You could feel it spreading. Genevieve, Richard said again, slower this time, savoring the sound. Our compliance specialist, our numbers girl, the one who sees everything. Quiet, careful, watching. He leaned forward. It is always the quiet ones. My throat closed. There are moments in life where you expect to scream, to defend yourself, to fight back. Instead, you sit paralyzed, your body betraying you. That was me. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, my heart pounding against my ribs, my hands clutching the armrests until my knuckles ached. Sir, I managed, though my voice cracked like a child. There must be some mistake. Richard's laugh was low, cruel. I do not make mistakes, Miss Fuller, but apparently you do, and for that you will pay. He slammed a folder on the table. The sound echoed. Pages spilled out like the entrails of some slaughtered thing. I recognized them instantly, internal approval logs, transaction histories, notes written in my own handwriting. Except they were wrong. My handwriting, yes. My initials, yes. But the numbers were altered, changed in ways that made them unrecognizable from the versions I had triple-checked and filed away. My stomach lurched. Somebody had tampered with my work. Check her computer, Dominic muttered, not even pretending to whisper. She has always been too close to the data. Already done, Richard said smoothly, and we found enough. That was when the truth settled like ice in my veins. This wasn't an investigation. This was a performance. A script already written. The outcome decided before I even entered the room. I felt myself drowning in silence in the weight of everyone's eyes. Yet in that suffocating moment, something shifted inside me. Fear calcified into something else, something sharper. Have you ever been so far pushed against a wall that suddenly you stop trembling? That you stop gasping for air and instead see the cracks in the bricks behind you, the tiny details nobody else notices? That was what happened to me. My panic hardened into clarity. They thought I was powerless. They thought I was cornered. But they did not know me, not really. I inhaled slowly, then exhaled even slower, willing my hands to steady. My pulse still thundered, but a calm spread through me like cold water. Richard leaned closer, his tie dangling inches from my notebook. The authorities will be here shortly, he said. Until then, sit tight and pray. The room tilted, voices muffled as though I were underwater. The word authorities echoed in my mind. Police, prison, mugshot. I wanted to cry. I wanted to vanish. But instead, I reached for the only weapon I had, composure. I lifted my eyes to Richard, and for the first time since the meeting began, I smiled. A tiny smile. Dangerous because it didn't belong in that room. And in that instant, though nobody else realized it, I knew one thing: this story wasn't going to end the way Richard thought. The thing about silence is how heavy it becomes when no one dares to break it. After Richard's declaration, the conference room filled with it, thick and suffocating. I could hear the hum of the air vents, the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights above, the scrape of someone shifting uncomfortably in their chair. But no one spoke. No one defended me. I scanned the faces around the table, desperate for a flicker of recognition, a shred of solidarity. Amara avoided my eyes, staring down at her notepad as though she could disappear into the pages. Devin tugged at his tie, restless, his usual easy grin replaced with a nervous frown. Lucia, the office manager who always seemed to know everything, met my gaze for half a second before lowering hers. Terrence, the IT guy, sat motionless, unreadable, his hands folded like a monk's. 12 people I had worked beside for years, suddenly strangers. It was in their eyes, unspoken but clear. Maybe she did it. Maybe she is the one. Suspicion works like a virus. It does not need evidence. It only needs a carrier. And Richard had just infected them all. $2.5 million, Richard repeated, letting the number hang in the air. Stolen right from under our noses, cleverly, quietly. For 8 months this has gone on. He turned back toward me. 8 months since I moved you into this team, Genevieve. Do you think I do not see the connection? His voice was calm, but underneath it pulsed the threat of violence, not physical, but professional, reputational, the kind that could gut a career and leave nothing but ashes. I wanted to scream that I had done nothing wrong, that I had spent those very months double-checking every figure, documenting every inconsistency, living like a prisoner of my own spreadsheets. But the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I said softly, "You asked me to join this team. You told me you needed someone with attention to detail." The corner of his mouth twitched, and look how well that turned out. Laughter. Not from him, but from someone near the end of the table. Nervous, brittle. It cut through me sharper than a knife. Was that how little they thought of me? That they could laugh while my life unraveled? Richard slapped the folder again. "Everything we need is right here. The approvals, the altered logs, the authorization codes, all traced back to you." I forced myself to look at the pages, though bile rose in my throat. There were my initials, my notes scrawled in the margins. But the numbers, God, the numbers were wrong. They had been altered, shifted in subtle ways. Enough to make me look complicit, enough to damn me in any investigation. And then it hit me. This was never about finding the thief. This was about naming one, and Richard had chosen me. I swallowed hard. "You forged these." He tilted his head, mock amusement in his eyes. "Careful, Miss Fuller. Accusations like that could make your situation much worse." The room tilted again, my vision narrowing. I gripped the armrests until my nails dug into the leather. My body trembled, but my mind, strangely, was clearing. It was true what they say. When you hit bottom, fear burns itself out. It leaves behind something different, something harder. A stillness. I realized then that if I didn't fight back, I was finished. Richard wanted me destroyed because I was useful as a scapegoat. If I stayed quiet, I'd be carted off in handcuffs within the hour. But if I spoke, if I played the one card I had been holding in secret, maybe, just maybe, I had a chance. I thought of the files I had been compiling for months, the screenshots saved to external drives, the backups tucked away where no one could touch them. I hadn't known exactly why I kept them, only that patterns in the numbers unsettled me. Now I understood. I had been preparing for this moment without even realizing it. I looked up, forcing my hands to still, forcing my voice not to tremble. "You might want to be careful, Richard." A ripple of surprise moved across the room. His brow furrowed. "Excuse me. You seem so confident," I said slowly. "But confidence can be dangerous, especially if you don't know what I have." Gasps, a shift of energy, subtle but real. For the first time, the power dynamic wavered. Richard narrowed his eyes, but I saw the flicker, the tiniest flicker of doubt. He leaned closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "Do not bluff me." I met his gaze steadily. "Then don't test me." The silence that followed was louder than any shouting match. For a heartbeat, the room was balanced on a knife's edge. And then Richard straightened, regaining his composure. "Enough," he barked to the others. "This meeting is adjourned. Authorities will take it from here." Chairs scraped. Papers rustled. People stood, hesitant, glancing between him and me as though unsure which side of history they had just witnessed. I didn't move. My body was rigid, but inside, a strange calm had settled. I had survived the first strike. Barely, but this war was far from over. As the others filed out, Dominic lingered, watching me with a look I couldn't decipher, part suspicion, part curiosity, maybe even a sliver of respect. He opened his mouth, then closed it again and left without a word. Finally, it was just me and Richard. He stood at the head of the table, arms folded, eyes cold. "You think you can play this game?" he said. "You're out of your depth, Genevieve. I built this company. I own this room. I decide who stays and who goes." I rose slowly, steadying myself on the chair. "Then you should remember one thing, Richard." His lips curled. "And what is that?" I walked past him, close enough to smell the sharp tang of his cologne, close enough to feel the heat of his anger radiating. At the door, I paused, glanced back over my shoulder. "It's always the quiet ones you should worry about." And with that, I left him standing in the silence he had once commanded, a silence that now belonged to me. The walk back to my desk felt like marching through enemy territory. Every step echoed too loud against the marble floor, every glance from a colleague a silent question I couldn't answer. By the time I reached my cubicle, I could barely breathe. My hands shook so violently I had to press them flat against the desk to stop them from trembling. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. 4 years of meticulous work, of being the one people relied on to spot errors, to catch mistakes others missed, and now in one morning I was branded a thief. I sat down, staring at my computer screen without seeing it. Richard's words replayed in my mind like a recording on loop. The authorities are on their way. Prison. Mugshot. My parents' faces when they read the news. My sister's voice, sharp with disappointment. My reputation turned to ash. For a moment, despair crushed me flat. I wanted to curl into myself, vanish into the fabric of the chair, dissolve into air. But the feeling didn't last. Something else rose up, fierce and unyielding. Anger, not wild, not reckless. Cold, sharp, precise. Richard had chosen me because I was convenient, because I was quiet, cautious, a rule follower, because he thought I wouldn't fight back. He thought I'd go down without a sound, a sacrificial lamb. He had underestimated me. I leaned back, forcing my breathing into a slow rhythm. My heart still pounded, but beneath it was a steady determination. I wasn't helpless. Not completely. I had something he didn't know about. 10 months ago, I had noticed small discrepancies in our financial records. Nothing big, nothing that would raise alarms on its own. But patterns emerged, faint but consistent. When I brought them to my old supervisor, he brushed me off. "Overthinking," he'd said. "Don't waste your time." So I had done what I always did when dismissed. I documented everything. Screenshots, notes, backup files. I kept copies tucked away on secure drives. Not because I expected a storm like this, but because details mattered to me. Because patterns that didn't make sense gnawed at me until I captured them somewhere safe. And when Richard personally moved me to the special projects team 8 months ago, I brought the habit with me. I recorded meetings. Saved versions of documents before and after they were corrected. I wasn't looking for fraud back then. I was just tired of being ignored. Now those records might be the only thing standing between me and ruin. I opened the encrypted folder on my laptop, my fingers steadier than I expected. File after file stared back at me, time-stamped and categorized, a meticulous archive of everything I had seen and touched. Proof that the alterations in Richard's folder weren't mine. Proof that he had ordered changes under the guise of fixing client relations or balancing discrepancies. Proof that the $2.5 million didn't vanish by accident. It was no longer just documentation. It was a weapon. But weapons are dangerous, especially when pointed at men like Richard Crane. A message pinged on my screen. "Dominic. Conference room, 10 minutes. Urgent." My stomach tightened. Another meeting? After what just happened? I considered ignoring it, but curiosity pulled me back. If Dominic wanted me there, it was either to finish the execution or something else. I slipped my phone into my pocket, the secure folder still open but minimized, and walked toward the glass conference room at the far end of the floor. Inside, Dominic sat alone at the head of the table, a place he usually avoided when Richard was around. He looked up as I entered, his expression unreadable. "Close the door," he said. I hesitated. Because you're about to want it closed." My pulse spiked. Against my better judgment, I obeyed. Dominic leaned forward, folding his hands. "You're in deep trouble, Fuller." "No kidding," I said, my voice sharper than intended. "Richard, not letting this go. He wants you gone, but..." Dominic trailed off, studying me. "I saw your face in there. You didn't look guilty. You looked prepared." I froze. Was he fishing, or had he noticed more than he should have? "What do you want from me, Dominic?" He smirked faintly. "To know whether you're really as helpless as you look, or if you've got something hidden." My breath caught. The way he said it, it was almost taunting, but there was curiosity too, maybe even a hint of respect. "I don't know what you're talking about," I lied. "Sure." He leaned back, crossing his arms. "Look, I'm not your friend, but I've worked under Richard long enough to know he sets people up when it suits him. I also know you're not stupid." So here's my advice. If you've got anything that proves your innocence, now's the time to use it. Because once the cops walk through that door, it's over. I stared at him, weighing his words. Was he warning me out of decency, or was he trying to confirm his suspicion for Richard? Before I could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, grimaced, then stood. Do what you want, Fuller, but don't wait too long. And just like that, he walked out, leaving me with more questions than answers. I sank into a chair, pressing my palms to my eyes. My life was collapsing around me, yet for the first time I felt a flicker of control. Richard thought he had written the script. He didn't know I'd been quietly writing my own. The authorities were coming. The stage was set. And I was done playing the silent victim. The hours that followed dragged like years. I sat at my desk pretending to work, fingers hovering over the keyboard, but my mind was nowhere near the spreadsheets in front of me. Every sound made me jump. The ding of the elevator, the squeak of shoes on polished floors, the muffled ring of a phone in a distant cubicle. Each one could have been the signal that the authorities had arrived to escort me out. No one spoke to me, not directly. I caught whispers as I passed, fragments of sentences that broke off the moment I came within earshot. I heard can you believe, after all those late nights? It was like being erased in real time, my identity rewritten by gossip before I could defend myself. By lunch, I couldn't stand the suffocating stares any longer. I grabbed my coat and headed outside, the cold air shocking against my flushed skin. The city buzzed around me as if nothing had happened. People hurried to meetings, taxis honked, street vendors called out for customers. And there I was, walking like a ghost through the middle of it, my world collapsing while everyone else's stayed intact. I found a bench in a small plaza, sat down, and opened my phone. My thumb hovered over the secure folder again, the one place I knew I had power. I scrolled through the evidence, screenshots of altered transactions, recordings of Richard's instructions to adjust client records, logs of files that mysteriously changed overnight. It was all there, neat and meticulous, the way I'd always done everything. And for the first time, I wondered if I had enough not just to defend myself, but to bring him down. That thought scared me more than the idea of handcuffs. Because what kind of person went to war with their own CEO? What kind of life would I have afterward? Richard had been right about one thing. Companies don't like whistleblowers. Even if you save the ship, they remember you as the one who exposed the holes. But then I pictured his face when he leaned over me in the conference room, smug and certain that he had already won. I remembered the sound of nervous laughter at the table, the betrayal in eyes that once looked at me with camaraderie. And the anger returned, steady and cold. I couldn't stay silent anymore. My phone buzzed in my hand, a message from Amara. Are you okay? I hesitated, staring at the words. Did she mean it, or was she fishing for information to pass back to Richard? I wanted to trust her. She had always been kind, the one who covered for me when I worked too late, the one who brought me tea when my headaches got bad. But in this new reality, trust felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. I typed back, trying to be. A minute later, her reply came, if you need to talk, call me. I don't believe what they're saying. My chest tightened. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. Still, I didn't call. Not yet. Talking meant opening up, and opening up meant risk. For now, the safest place was inside my own silence. I returned to the office later that afternoon, my steps slower, my resolve heavier. As soon as I sat down, Lucia appeared beside my cubicle, holding a stack of files. Her eyes darted around nervously before she set them on my desk. Thought you might need these, she whispered. I frowned. What are they? Internal memos, printouts of approvals. Some of them don't match the digital versions. She lowered her voice even further. I don't know what's going on, Genevieve, but just be careful. Before I could thank her, she walked away quickly, as if she hadn't spoken to me at all. I opened the files and my breath caught. She was right. The discrepancies were obvious if you looked closely, dates that didn't align, approvals logged at impossible hours, signatures copied and pasted. It was sloppy work, the kind of sloppiness that suggested whoever had altered them didn't think anyone would bother checking. Richard hadn't counted on me. By the time evening fell, the office had emptied, leaving only the hum of computers and the occasional clatter of a janitor's cart. I stayed at my desk, piecing together the fragments, connecting them to the records in my secure folder. The picture grew clearer with every passing hour. The theft hadn't been random. It was orchestrated, and the trail led back to the very man who had pointed his finger at me that morning. At 9:47 p.m., my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a message. It was a calendar reminder. Tomorrow, meeting with external auditors 10:00 a.m. My stomach dropped. Tomorrow, Richard would hand everything over to people outside the company. He would spin his narrative, and once it left our walls, I might not get the chance to change it. I sat back, staring at the ceiling. My options narrowed before me. I could wait, hope the truth surfaced on its own, and likely end up in prison. Or I could act. Take control before the story hardened around me like concrete. And in that moment, I knew what I had to do. I copied the entire secure folder onto 2 encrypted drives. One went into my bag, the other I locked in a small fireproof safe under my desk. Insurance. Then I drafted an email. Short, simple, to the point. Addressed to someone I never thought I'd contact. To Federal Bureau of Investigation. Subject: financial irregularities at Arden Global. Evidence attached. My hand hovered over the send button. Once I pressed it, there would be no going back. I thought of my parents, my sister, of the life I'd spent building one cautious brick at a time. I thought of Richard's smirk, his certainty that I was already destroyed. And then I hit send. The file uploaded, the email vanished, and with it, so did the last version of myself who stayed quiet when things were wrong. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of it settling in my chest. Tomorrow, the storm would break. Richard thought he had written the ending to my story, but I had just rewritten the script. Morning arrived like a verdict. I barely slept, my mind running loops of every possible outcome. By the time I walked into Arden Global's glass tower, the city was just waking, but I felt like I'd been awake for 100 years. The lobby was quieter than usual, though I knew it wasn't silence. It was tension. People glanced at me from behind their phones, conversations broke off when I passed. My badge beeped at the security gate, but the guard's nod was stiff, colder than yesterday. The news had traveled. It always did. I rode the elevator up, watching my reflection in the mirrored walls. Pale skin, dark circles under my eyes, a jaw set tighter than I'd ever seen it. This wasn't the woman who used to blend into the background, unnoticed and unremarkable. Something had shifted. I wasn't sure if it was strength or desperation. Maybe both. At 9:55 a.m., I took my seat in the conference room again. The same table, the same screen, but the air felt heavier, more suffocating. The external auditors were due any minute. Richard sat at the head of the table, perfectly composed, as if the chaos of yesterday had been nothing but a minor inconvenience. He looked at me, his smile sharp as glass. "Enjoy your last day, Genevieve?" I didn't respond. My fingers curled around the USB drive in my pocket, the one holding everything. The others trickled in: Amara with her anxious eyes, Devin with his loosened tie, Lucia clutching her notebook, Terrence trailing silently behind. They sat, avoiding my gaze. Only Dominic met my eyes directly, a flicker of curiosity in his expression. Richard stood, clearing his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we will be cooperating fully with the auditors. Transparency is paramount. We will show them that Arden Global has nothing to hide." I almost laughed. The hypocrisy was staggering. The auditors arrived, 2 of them professional and brisk. They introduced themselves, set up laptops, and got to work. Richard guided them like a host at a dinner party, pulling files, pointing out reports, spinning the narrative with practiced ease. And all the while, he kept glancing at me, a predator watching his prey bleed. My pulse quickened, but I forced myself to stay calm. Every time he spoke, I thought of the folder on my laptop, the copies in my bag, the email I had sent last night. The FBI had my files now. They hadn't responded yet, but I knew they would. Still, the fear gnawed at me. What if it wasn't enough? What if Richard buried me before they arrived? Halfway through the meeting, one of the auditors looked up from her screen. "These approval logs, who signed off on them?" Richard's smile widened. "Our compliance specialist, Miss Fuller." Dozens of eyes turned to me again. I steadied myself. "Those aren't my approvals." Richard's chuckle filled the room. "Denying it won't change the facts." I leaned forward, my voice sharper than I intended. "No, Richard, denying it doesn't erase the fact that those files were altered. Anyone who looks closely can see the discrepancies." A ripple of murmurs. Richard's expression faltered for just a second before he recovered. "You're out of your depth," he said smoothly. Maybe I was, but I wasn't empty-handed. I reached into my bag and set my phone on the table, screen dark, but the gesture deliberate. "I hope you're sure about what you're saying, Richard," I said quietly, "because once the truth comes out, you won't be able to take it back." The room froze. The auditors exchanged a glance. Dominic leaned forward slightly, intrigued. Richard's eyes narrowed, searching my face for weakness. Inside, my heart hammered, but I didn't let it show. That was the moment, the seed planted, the hint dropped. I had something. They didn't know what or how much, but they knew now that I wasn't walking into the gallows blind. Richard broke the silence first. "We'll see," he said coldly. The auditors returned to their work. The meeting dragged on, every minute an eternity. By the end, nothing was resolved, but everything had changed. Because for the first time, the doubt wasn't on me. It was on him. When the auditors left, Richard dismissed everyone else. One by one, my colleagues filed out until only Dominic remained, hovering by the door. He looked at me, then at Richard, then back again. Finally, he said, "You know, boss, if Genevieve is bluffing, it'll come out soon enough. And if she's not," he shrugged, "maybe you've got a bigger problem than you think." Richard's jaw tightened. Dominic left without another word. I stayed seated, the USB drive burning a hole in my pocket, the phone heavy on the table. I wasn't bluffing. Not entirely. But they didn't need to know the details. Not yet. As I walked out, I caught my reflection in the glass wall. My face looked different, still pale, still tired, but my eyes were steady. For the first time, I didn't see the scapegoat Richard wanted me to be. I saw the woman holding the match. That evening, the office felt emptier than usual. The glow from the city lights bled through the glass windows, painting everything in shades of gold and shadow. I stayed late, pretending to organize files, but really I was stalling. I wasn't ready to face the silence of my apartment yet, not when every thought inside my head was a storm. I replayed the moment over and over again, the way Richard's face had twitched when I set my phone on the table, the ripple that had passed through the room, the flicker of uncertainty in Dominic's eyes. For the first time, Richard wasn't completely in control, and I had put that crack in his armor. But cracks aren't victories. They're only openings. I opened the secure folder again, scrolling through files until my eyes blurred. Each document felt like a lifeline and a curse all at once. If I used them wrong, I'd go down with him. If I used them right, the thought terrified me almost as much as prison. Because what happened after? Even if I exposed Richard, even if I saved myself, I'd never be the same. No company hires a whistleblower. The corporate world thrives on silence, and I was on the edge of breaking it wide open. The elevator dinged. I stiffened, half expecting Richard himself, but it was Lucia. She stepped in quietly, balancing a coffee cup in one hand, a folder in the other. "You're still here," she said softly. "So are you." She smiled faintly, setting the cup on my desk. "Thought you could use this." I blinked at her. "Why?" "Because I watched you today," she said, lowering her voice. "You didn't look guilty. You looked cornered. And I don't like watching people get cornered." My throat tightened. For hours, I had felt like the loneliest person in the building. Her words cracked something inside me. She pushed the folder toward me. More mismatched records. I didn't want to hand them directly to Richard. I thought you should see them first. I opened it. Just like the others she'd given me, the inconsistencies were blatant once you knew where to look. Wrong dates, impossible signatures, numbers that shifted subtly but significantly. "You're risking a lot giving me these," I said. Lucia shrugged. "So are you." For a moment, silence stretched between us, not heavy this time, but fragile, an unspoken agreement. She left soon after, leaving me with the folder and the coffee and a warmth in my chest I hadn't expected. Maybe I wasn't entirely alone. I packed my bag and headed out. The city air was sharp, the streets buzzing with the usual nighttime rhythm. But I moved through it differently now, my steps quicker, my mind clearer. I had allies, however quiet. I had evidence, however dangerous. And I had a decision to make. The next morning, Richard called another meeting. He looked calm, collected, but I noticed the tightness around his mouth, the way his hand tapped against the table when he thought no one was watching. "The auditors will continue their review over the next few weeks," he announced. "Until then, this division is under scrutiny. I expect complete cooperation. No mistakes, no delays." His eyes landed on me, "Especially from you, Genevieve." I kept my face neutral, but inside I wanted to laugh. He was rattled. Not much, not enough for anyone else to notice, but I saw it. After the meeting, Amara caught up with me in the hallway. "Can we talk?" she asked, glancing around nervously. We ducked into an empty break room. She twisted her wedding ring anxiously, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what's happening, but I don't believe you did it." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I had been bracing myself against suspicion for so long that trust felt almost foreign. "Why?" I asked. "Because I've worked with you for years. You don't even take extra paper clips home. And Richard," she hesitated, "he's been off lately." Meetings behind closed doors, odd requests. I thought I was imagining it, but now, she trailed off, but I didn't need her to finish. She had seen it too, the cracks, the inconsistencies. "Thank you," I said, my voice rough. She nodded quickly. "Be careful, Genevieve. Whatever this is, it's bigger than you, and Richard doesn't play fair." When she left, I stood alone in the break room, her warning echoing in my mind. Bigger than me. She was right. The missing money, the altered files, the falsified approvals, it wasn't just one man's scheme. It had to be a network, a web, something sprawling and hidden, and I was standing in the middle of it. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, the glow of my phone on the nightstand casting faint light across the room. I thought about Richard's words, about Lucia's quiet defiance, about Amara's trembling faith. I thought about the USB drive in my bag, about the email I had already sent to the FBI. Richard thought he had chosen the scapegoat, the weak link, but he had chosen wrong, because the quiet ones notice things. The quiet ones remember. The quiet ones keep receipts. And sometimes, the quiet ones fight back. The storm didn't wait. It arrived the very next week. Auditors swarmed our floor like hawks circling prey. They weren't the kind of people you could charm with smiles or distract with polished speeches. They were quiet, methodical, unsympathetic. And the more they dug, the more the air in Arden Global thickened. You could feel it in the break room, where conversations cut off mid-sentence when someone walked in. You could feel it in the elevator rides, stiff and silent, eyes fixed on glowing numbers overhead. Everyone knew we were under a microscope, and everyone was terrified of being caught in the wrong light. I tried to keep my head down, but it was impossible. Richard had painted me as the thief, and no audit could erase the suspicion overnight. People avoided sitting near me in meetings. My emails were scrutinized more heavily than anyone else's. Even my coffee breaks felt like a performance, every sip judged, every movement cataloged. And yet, cracks were showing. 2 executives resigned suddenly for personal reasons. One morning, we arrived to find their offices cleaned out, names already stripped from the directory. Whispers followed, whispers that they had been caught up in the irregularities, that Richard was scrambling to keep the fire from spreading. But it was spreading. I knew because I could see it in Richard himself. His speeches grew shorter, his temper sharper. He no longer looked invincible. He looked cornered, and a cornered man is dangerous. One evening, I stayed late again, combing through my folder, piecing the puzzle together. The evidence was damning but incomplete. I had enough to prove Richard's fingerprints were on the fraud, but if Amara was right, if this was bigger than just him, then I was still staring at shadows. A knock at my cubicle startled me. I turned to see Terrence, the IT guy, standing awkwardly with his hands shoved into his hoodie pocket. "Can I help you?" I asked. He glanced around nervously before speaking. "Your computer been flagged." My chest tightened. "Flagged how?" "Richard asked me to monitor your activity, said you were unstable, but I noticed something." He leaned closer, his voice dropping. "Someone been remotely accessing your files from his office." The words sent a chill through me. "Can you prove that?" I whispered. Terrence nodded. "Already did. I saved the server logs. I thought you should know." I stared at him, torn between relief and fear. Relief that someone else had seen the truth. Fear that I had less time than I thought. "Why are you helping me?" I asked. He shrugged. "Because facts matter, and because what he's doing is wrong." He handed me a flash drive, then disappeared into the hallway before I could thank him. I sat frozen for a long time, staring at the small piece of plastic in my hand. Each ally that revealed themselves, Lucia, Amara, now Terrence, strengthened my case but also reminded me how deep the rot ran. Richard wasn't acting alone. He couldn't be. Too many approvals, too many altered documents. The thought made me sick. The next day, the FBI finally responded. A simple email: "We've received your materials. Additional documentation requested. Agent contact forthcoming." My hands shook as I read it. This was real. Bigger than company politics, bigger than boardroom whispers, federal authorities. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Genevieve Fuller, the woman who once color-coded her grocery lists and panicked over parking tickets, was now in the middle of a federal fraud investigation. At lunch, Amara joined me at a corner table in the cafeteria, her tray untouched. She leaned in, whispering quickly. "I heard the board is furious. They think Richard kept them in the dark. If the auditors find proof he lied to them, he's finished." I wanted to believe her, but Richard had survived worse storms. He thrived on manipulation, on turning suspicion outward. That was his greatest weapon, making sure the spotlight never stayed on him long enough to burn. But this time, the spotlight was growing brighter. Later that afternoon, Richard stormed into the office unannounced. His face was red, his tie crooked, his eyes wild. He called a meeting on the spot, dragging half the division into the conference room. "This witch hunt ends now," he snapped, pacing like a caged animal. "I will not let baseless accusations destroy what I've built." His gaze zeroed in on me. "And I will not let one disgruntled employee poison this company with lies." Whispers filled the room. He had never been this reckless, this blunt. I forced myself to sit tall to meet his eyes without flinching. "You should be careful with your words, Richard. They have a way of coming back around." His lips curled. "Is that a threat?" "No," I said calmly. "It's a promise." The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel the weight of every stare, the shock that I had spoken at all. I had always been the quiet one, the compliant one. To defy him openly was unthinkable. But the truth was, I wasn't the same woman he thought he could bury. When the meeting ended, people left in uneasy silence. But as I gathered my things, Dominic lingered by the door. "You're playing with fire," he said softly. "Maybe," I replied, "but at least I'm not the one holding the gasoline." For the first time, he laughed. Not mockingly, not cruelly. A short, surprised laugh. Then he shook his head and walked away. I stood alone, my pulse racing, a strange mix of terror and exhilaration flooding me. Richard wanted me erased, but instead I was becoming harder to ignore. And I knew then, with absolute clarity, this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about justice. The next week was a blur of chaos. Auditors combed through every department like surgeons slicing through tissue. Files disappeared from shared drives, then reappeared altered. Emails were forwarded, flagged, dissected. Rumors spread faster than facts. People whispered of sealed indictments, of resignations that hadn't been announced yet. It was as if the entire company was standing on a fault line, waiting for the earthquake to split us in half. And at the center of it all was Richard Crane. He doubled down, holding pep talks in the mornings that sounded more like sermons, promising that Arden Global would weather this storm, that loyalty would be rewarded. But behind the facade, cracks widened. He barked at assistants, slammed doors, snapped at executives. His eyes darted more, his hands trembled when he thought no one was watching. I noticed everything. That was the curse of being the quiet one. You couldn't unsee what you observed. And what I saw was a man unraveling. Late one night, while most of the office was dark, I sat with Lucia in a corner cubicle surrounded by stacks of printouts. She pointed to a chain of emails, her finger trembling. "Look at this. These approvals weren't just Richard. They were CC'd to 3 other directors." My stomach dropped. The pattern was undeniable. The fraud wasn't the work of one man. It was a network. Lucia swallowed hard. "If this gets out, the whole leadership team could fall." "And they'll do anything to stop that from happening," I murmured. She looked at me, fear in her eyes. "Are you sure you want to keep pushing this? You're already their scapegoat. If you burn them, they'll come for you harder." I closed the folder with a snap. "They're already coming for me. The only choice I have now is whether I fight back or let them bury me." Lucia studied me for a long moment before nodding. "Then you're not doing it alone." Her words warmed me more than I could admit. The following morning, a rumor swept through the building like wildfire. The board was holding emergency meetings without Richard. People whispered in elevators, in the cafeteria line, in the narrow hallways between conference rooms. Some said the board was considering suspension. Others said they were negotiating his exit quietly to avoid scandal. Richard must have heard the whispers too, because by noon, he stormed into our division, demanding everyone gather. He stood at the head of the table, face flushed, tie yanked loose. "You think you know what's going on," he thundered. "You think you can read rumors on your phones and piece together the truth. But let me tell you this, I am this company. Without me, there is no Arden Global." His gaze drilled into me, burning hot. "And anyone who tries to take me down will regret it." The room went deathly still. People shifted uncomfortably, staring at the table, their hands anywhere but me. For a heartbeat, I considered staying quiet. Survival instinct screamed at me to look down, to nod, to fade. But something stronger spoke louder. "Then maybe it's time this company learns it can survive without you," I said. Gasps echoed around the table. Richard's face twisted in rage. For a second, I thought he might actually lunge across the table. But instead, he smiled. Slow, deliberate, cruel. "You think you're brave, Genevieve," he said softly, so only those closest could hear. "But bravery won't save you when the walls close in, and they will." He dismissed the meeting, leaving behind a trail of fear and confusion. But as people filed out, I noticed something subtle. They glanced at me differently, not with suspicion anymore, but with something like curiosity, maybe even hope. That afternoon, Amara slipped into my cubicle. Her hands shook as she handed me a folded piece of paper. "I don't know if this will help, but you should see it." When I unfolded it, my breath caught. It was an internal memo, marked confidential, detailing a series of adjustments to client accounts. And at the bottom were signatures, Richard, yes, but also 2 other executives. Proof. I looked up at her. "Where did you get this?" She hesitated. "It was slipped under my door this morning. I don't know who left it." The paper felt like fire in my hands. Every ally, every shred of evidence was a step closer to exposing the truth, but also a step closer to danger. Whoever slipped this under Amara's door was either trying to help me or trying to bait me. Maybe both. That night, I sat in my apartment surrounded by documents, memos, flash drives, my laptop open to the secure folder that now felt like the most dangerous thing I owned. Outside, sirens wailed through the city streets. Inside, the only sound was the frantic beat of my heart. I thought about everything I had learned in the past week, the forged approvals, the server logs, the signatures. This was Richard alone. This was systemic. And that meant the board's whispers of containment were nothing but self-preservation. They would sacrifice anyone, myself included, to protect their empire. But I wasn't going quietly. I drafted another email to the FBI, attaching the new documents. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Once again, it felt like crossing a line I could never uncross. But then I remembered Richard's voice, low and venomous. "You'll regret this." I hit send. As the files uploaded, I whispered into the silence of my apartment, as if speaking it aloud would make it true. "You picked the wrong, quiet one, Richard." The summons came on a gray Tuesday morning. An email, short and cold. Board of Directors, urgent meeting. Attendance required. For a long moment, I stared at the screen, the words blurring. I had known this was coming in some form or another, but seeing it there in black and white turned my stomach to stone. The board, the faceless power behind Arden Global. The ones who whispered about suspension, who cut deals in closed rooms, who could erase someone's career with the stroke of a pen. And now they wanted me in their presence. I walked to the top floor alone, my footsteps muffled by thick carpet. The boardroom was cavernous, lined with glass, the city skyline sprawling behind them like a painted backdrop. 12 directors sat at the long table, every eye on me as I entered. Richard was there too, standing near the window, arms crossed, a dark smirk tugging at his mouth. "Miss Fuller," the chairwoman said. Her voice was clipped, efficient. "Sit." I obeyed, feeling the weight of their gaze. "We have reviewed preliminary findings from both the auditors and our own internal reviews," she continued. "Irregularities persist, serious irregularities." Her eyes flicked toward Richard, then back to me. "You have been named in connection with these findings." Richard's smirk widened, but then the chairwoman added, "We are aware you contest this." Something in her tone caught me off guard. She wasn't accusing me, she was testing me. I swallowed. "Because it isn't true." A low murmur rippled through the table. The chairwoman raised a hand for silence. "We are not here to determine guilt today. We are here to determine damage control. Arden Global's reputation is at stake, and we must consider all outcomes." Richard stepped forward. "The outcome is obvious. She fabricated data, siphoned funds, and now she's spinning lies to cover her tracks. If we don't cut her loose now, we all drown with her." I met his eyes. "Funny, considering the documents show approvals with your signature." Gasps, whispers, his jaw tightened. "Forgery," he snapped. The chairwoman's gaze sharpened. "Perhaps. Or perhaps not, which is why we are speaking to you directly, Miss Fuller. Do you have anything that might persuade us you are not what Mr. Crane claims?" My pulse thundered. They were giving me an opening, a sliver of a chance, but I knew better than to bear everything. The board wasn't my ally. They weren't looking for truth. They were looking for survival, so I chose my words carefully. "I have kept detailed records of my work since the day I joined this company," I said steadily. "Records that prove the discrepancies weren't mine, and if necessary, I will provide those records to the appropriate authorities." The silence that followed was absolute. Richard exploded. "She's bluffing, she has nothing, you cannot let this." "Enough," the chairwoman snapped. For the first time, Richard fell silent. Her eyes remained fixed on me. "Authorities, you say?" I didn't blink. "Yes." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Then let me give you some advice, Miss Fuller. Be very careful about the path you choose. There are those who would rather this matter disappear quietly, for everyone's sake." I heard the warning beneath the words, not advice, a threat. The meeting ended soon after. They dismissed me without ceremony, leaving Richard to smolder by the window, his face twisted in fury. As I stood, he muttered just loud enough for me to hear. "You won't survive this, Genevieve. You think you're clever, but you're just a pawn, and pawns get sacrificed." I looked at him one last time before walking out. "Maybe, but pawns can also become queens." The doors shut behind me, the words still burning on my tongue. Outside the boardroom, I leaned against the wall, breathing hard. I should have been terrified. I was in some ways, but more than that, I felt something else. A dangerous clarity. The board wasn't united. They were fracturing, just like Richard, and in their fracture lay my chance. That night, I returned home to find a plain envelope slipped under my apartment door. No name, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "We know what you've sent, be smart. Stay quiet, or you'll regret it." The words were typed unsigned. For a long time, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the note, the city noise pulsing faintly through the window. Fear prickled my skin, but beneath it was something hotter, stronger. They wanted me quiet. They wanted me afraid. But I wasn't the same woman I had been weeks ago. I folded the note carefully, slid it into a folder with the rest of my evidence, and whispered into the silence, "You should have picked someone else." I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I dozed with the lights on, waking at every sound outside my window, every creak in the hallway. The anonymous note lay on the table like a poison I couldn't throw away. By morning, I was exhausted but wired, nerves stretched too thin. When I left for work, I noticed something I had never seen before: a black sedan parked across the street from my building. The windows were tinted, the engine running though no one got out. I told myself it was nothing. Coincidence, just another car in a city full of cars. But as I walked toward the subway, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone inside was watching me. At the office, Richard acted as though the board meeting had never happened. He was calm, too calm, his voice smooth in morning briefings, his smile polished. But underneath, I could see the crack widening. He knew I had rattled the board. He knew I wasn't bluffing entirely. And worse, he knew I wasn't alone anymore. Lucia passed me another file in the hallway that afternoon, slipping it into my hand so quickly no one else could notice. Amara brought me coffee, her hand brushing mine briefly in silent reassurance. Even Terrence gave me a nod across the floor, his eyes flicking toward Richard's office with unspoken warning. I wasn't imagining it. The tide was shifting. Slowly, carefully, but it was shifting. Still, every ally made me more of a target. That evening, as I left the office, I felt the hairs on my neck rise. I turned once, twice, but the crowd on the street was too thick to tell if I was being followed. I walked faster, my heart pounding, until I reached my apartment. Inside, I locked the door, checked the windows, double-checked the locks. And then I sat in the dark with my laptop open, the glow of the screen casting a pale light over the room. The FBI had sent another message: "Agent assignment pending. Continue documenting. Do not confront alone." The words steadied me, even as fear clawed at my chest. I wasn't alone. Not completely. Someone out there was listening, someone who believed me enough to act. I copied more files, more screenshots, every scrap of evidence I could gather. The folder was growing monstrous now, a beast of documentation. And with every file I added, I felt the weight of it more. It wasn't just my proof anymore. It was my shield, my weapon, my only leverage in a game stacked against me. But games like this had rules, and one of them was clear. If they couldn't buy me or silence me, they would break me. The next day, it nearly happened. I was walking to the subway after work when a man brushed past me, his shoulder slamming into mine hard enough to knock me sideways. My bag slipped from my shoulder, spilling papers onto the pavement. I bent to grab them, but the man was already gone, disappearing into the crowd. At first I thought it was nothing, just a shove, an accident. But when I got home, I realized my flash drive was missing. The one Terrence had given me, with the server logs. I sat on the floor of my apartment, shaking, the empty slot in my bag screaming at me. They had taken it. My evidence wasn't safe anymore, not even outside the office. For hours, I paced my living room trying to calm the panic. But then I remembered redundancy. I still had backups, the drive in my desk at work, the encrypted folder on my laptop, the cloud storage account under a false name. They couldn't erase it all. Still, the message was clear. They were watching me. They knew where I lived, what I carried, what I held. That night, I called Amara. For the first time, I let myself reach out. She answered on the second ring, her voice soft. "Genevieve?" I told her everything, the car outside, the note, the stolen drive. There was a long silence on the other end before she whispered, "You need to be careful. If they've moved beyond the office, it means they're desperate." "Desperate people make mistakes," I said, though my voice shook. "Or they get violent." Her words lingered long after we hung up. I didn't sleep again. I lay awake in the glow of my laptop, the hum of the city outside, the folder open like a lifeline. My life before this seemed so far away, spreadsheets and deadlines, quiet dinners alone, simple worries that had once felt enormous. Now, survival itself was the deadline. By dawn, one truth had hardened inside me. I couldn't keep waiting for others to act, not the board, not the auditors, not even the FBI. If I wanted to make it through this, I had to take control, and that meant risking everything. The day began with a silence that felt wrong. Usually the office buzzed with whispers, the low hum of panic leaking through every corridor. But that morning, as I walked in, there was nothing, just the sound of my own heels clicking against polished tile. People avoided my eyes, their faces tight, their conversations clipped to a single word before trailing off. Something had shifted. I reached my desk to find a sealed envelope waiting. No name on the front. Inside, a single sheet of paper, printed in stark black ink. We need to talk. Alone, tonight. 10 p.m. Pier 17. Come alone, my breath caught. There was no signature, but I knew instinctively it was Richard. This was someone else. Someone who wanted me alive at least long enough to talk. All day, I wrestled with it. It could be a trap, another setup. Or it could be the only chance to finally see the shape of the storm I had been stumbling through. By the time night fell, my decision was made. I left my apartment under layers of fear, my bag slung tight across my shoulder, a pepper spray canister hidden in my pocket. The city was alive with neon and noise, but my path felt solitary, every shadow sharper, every footstep behind me amplified. Pier 17 loomed dark and deserted, the water slapping against rotting wood. Fog drifted low, muting the glow of the city lights. I almost turned back, but then a figure stepped out from the shadows. Dominic, relief and suspicion tangled inside me. "You," I whispered. He gave a small nod, his hands shoved deep into his coat pockets. "I figured if I left a note on your desk, Richard would see it, so I slipped one to you directly. Guess it worked." My heart pounded. "Why? What do you want?" His eyes flicked toward the water, then back to me. For the first time since I'd known him, the usual smirk was gone. "You think Richard picked you because you were convenient," he said quietly. "Because you were quiet, but that's not the whole story." I slid down my spine. "What do you mean?" Dominic stepped closer. "You were placed on Richard's special projects team for a reason. You weren't just unlucky, you were chosen." The words rang in my skull, wrong and impossible. "Chosen by who?" "By the board," he said flatly. "At least some of them. Richard needed someone to hang it on if things went sideways, and they gave him you. A clean record, no connections, no powerful allies, perfect scapegoat." I staggered back a step, the dock creaking beneath me. My entire chest felt hollow. All this time, my voice cracked. "It wasn't random." Dominic shook his head. "Nothing about this is random. Richard didn't just skim a few million. This goes deeper. Offshore accounts, shell companies, money funneled through clients that don't exist. You've only seen the edges, and the board knew. Hell, some of them profited." The world tilted. I gripped the railing, the cold metal anchoring me. "And you're telling me this now, why?" "Because you're still alive," he said simply. "That means you've got leverage, enough that even Richard hasn't crushed you yet. I want to know what you've got." I stared at him, my mind racing. Was this another play, another attempt to smoke out my evidence? Or was Dominic, for reasons I couldn't yet see, truly tired of being Richard's shadow? "I don't trust you," I whispered. He gave a humorless smile. "Good, you shouldn't, but you don't have to trust me to listen." I hesitated, then asked the question that had been clawing at me for weeks. "Why tell me I was chosen? Why not let me go on thinking it was just Richard?" His eyes met mine, sharp and steady. "Because you need to understand something, Genevieve. This is Richard versus you. This is you versus all of them. He's just the blade. They're the hand that wields it." The words sank deep, heavy and undeniable. I wanted to argue, to reject it, but deep down I knew pieces of it already fit. The sudden promotions, the quiet reassignment to Richard's team, the way the board had threatened me with silence rather than outright firing. They hadn't just let me fall into this. They had set the trap. Dominic took a step back, fading into the fog. "Think about it. Decide who you're really fighting, because if you keep playing like it's just Richard, you'll lose." And then he was gone. I stood on the pier long after, the fog curling around me, my breath shivering in the cold air. For weeks, I had believed Richard Crane was the storm, the enemy, the man determined to ruin me. But now I saw the truth. Richard was only part of it. The real enemy was the board itself, the empire I had given 4 years of my life to, and I was no longer just fighting for survival. I was fighting against the architects of the entire machine. I didn't remember the walk home from the pier. My body carried me through the streets, but my mind was still there on the dock, replaying Dominic's words like broken glass cutting deeper every time. "You were chosen. Richard isn't the enemy, the board is." When I finally reached my apartment, I locked the door and sat in the dark, my bag still slung over my shoulder. My apartment suddenly felt smaller, the shadows heavier. If what Dominic said was true, then the game I thought I was playing was a lie. For weeks I had been preparing for war with Richard Crane. I'd built my case against him, documented his lies, gathered allies. But if he was just the blade and the board the hand that wielded it, then all my files were aimed at the wrong target. I opened my laptop, scrolling through the folder of evidence again, looking at it with new eyes. Yes, it implicated Richard, but it also touched others. The approvals weren't just his. The memos bore other signatures. The resignations of those executives weren't accidents. They had cut themselves free before the storm grew too wild. The pieces fit too well. Richard hadn't acted alone. He couldn't have. The phone buzzed beside me, startling me. A new message from an unknown number. "Stop digging, Genevieve. Last warning." My blood ran cold. This was Richard. His threats were loud, theatrical. This was something else. Quiet, efficient, corporate. A message not from a man unraveling, but from a machine protecting itself. I should have been terrified, and I was. My hands shook as I set the phone down, my chest tight. But beneath the fear was something else, anger, steady and hot, an anchor in the storm. They had chosen me because they thought I was weak, disposable, invisible. They were about to find out how wrong they were. The next day at the office, Richard was absent. Whispers flew. He was meeting with lawyers, with private bankers, with someone overseas. People speculated that he was cutting deals, preparing to vanish if things collapsed. I walked the halls with calm I didn't feel, watching, listening. Amara brushed past me in the break room, her voice a whisper. "Are you okay?" "No," I admitted, her eyes softened. "But you're still standing." She pressed something into my hand, a folded note. I waited until I was back at my desk to read it. Board members' scheduled closed-door session. Tonight. Location, Hotel Meriden, Suite 1705. I stared at the words, my pulse quickening. The board was meeting in secret off-site, without Richard. A chance. That evening, while most of the city slipped into neon comfort, I sat outside the Meriden in the shadows of the street, my hood up, my bag beside me. I felt absurd, like a child playing detective. But as I watched sleek black cars pull up to the curb, men and women in tailored suits stepping out, my absurdity faded. This was real. I followed carefully, blending into the hotel lobby crowd. From a quiet corner, I watched as they checked in at the desk, then disappeared into the elevators. Suite 1705. For a long time, I hovered, torn between reason and instinct. Reason told me to leave. I had no business here. Instinct told me this was the only way to glimpse the truth. Instinct won. I rode a separate elevator, heart pounding, and crept down the hall of the 17th floor. The suite door was closed, but muffled voices leaked through. I pressed closer, straining to catch fragments. Richard's unraveling. She knows more than we thought. Containment is critical. If the Bureau gets ahead of us, it's over. My stomach turned. They weren't even hiding it. They were planning damage control, not justice. My name hung between their words like a curse. Fuller can't be allowed to. The door suddenly opened. I stumbled back, nearly colliding with a tall man in a gray suit. His eyes narrowed, recognition flickering. "Who?" I bolted. Down the hall, into the elevator, heart thundering, adrenaline blurring the edges of my vision. I didn't stop until I was back on the street, lungs burning, hands shaking. They had seen me, at least one of them. My cover was gone. That night, I tore through my evidence again, desperate, frantic. I had to accelerate. The FBI would take weeks, months. I didn't have that kind of time. If the board decided to cut me out permanently, it wouldn't be with memos or warnings anymore. It would be final. At 2 a.m., I sat on my floor surrounded by papers, my laptop glowing with open files, and whispered into the silence. "You wanted quiet, you wanted invisible, you should have chosen someone else." The decision crystallized in that moment. I wouldn't just wait for the Bureau, I would go public. And when I did, I wouldn't just take Richard down, I would take the board with him. The decision felt like jumping from a cliff. Once I did it, there would be no way back. For days, I had hidden my evidence like a miser hoarding coins, afraid to spend it, afraid to let it go. But now, holding it tight no longer protected me. It only gave the board more time to crush me. So I took the leap. I spent the entire weekend crafting the package. Documents, memos, logs, recordings, all neatly organized, annotated, impossible to ignore. I drafted a letter, short and sharp, explaining what I had uncovered and how Arden Global's leadership had orchestrated one of the largest corporate frauds in recent history. Then I scheduled the send. Monday, 9:00 a.m. Recipients: the press, independent watchdog groups, financial regulators. By the time I pressed the final key, my hands were trembling, my heart racing like I had just run miles. But beneath it, a strange calm settled in. It was done. The story was no longer just mine. I sat back in the silence of my apartment, staring at the glow of my laptop. The clock ticked toward morning. When I arrived at the office that day, the building felt like a dam about to burst. Phones rang nonstop, executives rushed between meetings, assistants whispered frantically. Something was happening. At 9:03, the world shifted. My email had landed. News alerts flashed across screens. Arden Global implicated in massive fraud scandal. My name was everywhere, paired with words like whistleblower, insider, accuser. The room around me erupted into chaos. Colleagues gasped, some stared, others fled to make calls. Richard stormed into the division, face red, tie askew, shouting at anyone who dared meet his eye. "You did this," he roared at me, his voice cracking. "You've destroyed us." I stood. My legs felt steady even as adrenaline roared through me. "No, Richard, you destroyed yourself. I just told the truth." The silence that followed was louder than his rage. People stared, wide-eyed, some horrified, others almost relieved. For once, no one rushed to his defense. Richard lunged toward me, but security stepped in. The board must have acted fast. Within minutes, he was escorted out of the building, his shouts echoing down the corridor. But I knew it wasn't over. Not yet, because Richard wasn't the only one implicated. By noon, the press conference began. Cameras flashed, microphones crowded. The board appeared polished and stern, delivering statements about unfounded allegations and commitment to transparency. They tried to distance themselves, to sacrifice Richard as the single culprit, the bad apple. I watched from the sidelines, hidden in the crowd, my stomach turning. They were rewriting the story in real time, cutting me out, cutting themselves free. But they couldn't erase the evidence. Not this time. Too many eyes had seen it already. When the FBI agents arrived at the building that afternoon, the shift was palpable. Real investigators, real authority. This wasn't corporate theater anymore. This was justice, or something like it. Still, I couldn't shake the fear that somehow, even now, they would twist it, bury it, turn me into the villain again. The machine was vast, and I was only one woman. That night, back in my apartment, I sat in the dark with the blinds drawn, phone buzzing nonstop with messages from reporters, strangers, old colleagues. Some praised me. Others called me a traitor. And in the middle of it all, another message slipped through from an unknown number. "You've made enemies you don't understand. This isn't over." I stared at the screen, the words burning. They were right. This wasn't over. Exposing Richard and the board was only the beginning. I had cut into something deeper, something older, something that stretched beyond Arden Global. For the first time, I felt the enormity of what I had done. I hadn't just jumped off the cliff. I had lit it on fire behind me. And now, whatever came next, there was no going back. The days that followed felt like standing in the eye of a hurricane. Calm on the surface, chaos swirling on every side. Richard was gone. News broke of his arrest 2 nights later, caught at a private airstrip, passport in hand, cash stuffed into a duffel bag. The image was plastered across headlines. The once mighty CEO, reduced to a man in handcuffs, his face twisted with fury. But if his downfall brought relief, it was short-lived. Because the board wasn't collapsing with him. They were regrouping, rebranding the scandal as one man's betrayal, cutting ties, commissioning glossy statements about renewed integrity. And behind closed doors, they were already plotting who would replace him, how to salvage Arden Global's empire. I became the face of opposition without ever asking to be. Reporters camped outside my building, shoving microphones in my face, shouting questions. How long had I known? Did I profit from it? Was I working with the FBI? Every headline carried my name alongside words like whistleblower, traitor, heroine, destroyer. People looked at me differently on the street. Some with gratitude, some with disgust. Either way, the anonymity I once lived in was gone forever. At the office, if you could still call it that, the atmosphere was worse. Half the staff had resigned. Departments were gutted, morale shattered. Those who remained treated me like a ghost. Some whispered thanks when no one else was listening. Others looked at me like I was the reason their world was falling apart. And maybe, in a way, I was. Late one evening, as I gathered the last of my belongings from my desk, photographs, notebooks, small tokens of a life that no longer existed, I found Dominic waiting by the elevators. "You burned it all down," he said, almost admiring. "I just told the truth," I replied. He tilted his head. "Truth burns hotter than lies sometimes." We stood in silence for a moment. For the first time, his expression wasn't mocking, but serious. "They won't forget this, Genevieve. The board, their allies. You embarrass them. People like that don't forgive." "I know." He studied me, then gave a short nod. "Good luck." And then he was gone as suddenly as he had appeared. When the elevator doors closed, I felt the finality of it. My time at Arden Global was over, but my story was. The FBI kept me close in the following weeks, interviews stretching for hours, questions tearing apart every detail of what I'd uncovered. They promised protection, though I knew better than to believe protection was permanent. Power finds ways to bend the rules to twist outcomes. One night, alone in my apartment, I stood by the window watching the city pulse with light and motion. Down below, people hurried through the streets, chasing trains, carrying groceries, laughing into their phones. Ordinary lives, untouched by the storm that had consumed mine. I thought about who I had been just months ago, quiet, cautious, blending into the background. A woman who kept receipts, who noticed details, who never imagined she'd become a target in a war far bigger than herself. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone scarred but unbroken, someone who had stood against giants and refused to be erased. And yet, the note I had received weeks ago still echoed in my mind. You've made enemies you don't understand. I understood now. Arden Global was just one head of a much larger beast. Richard Crane had fallen, but the machine that built him still turned, still fed on silence, and I had become its enemy. I closed the blinds, turned off the lights, and whispered to the dark, more to myself than anyone else. They should have chosen someone else. The city roared on outside, indifferent, but inside I knew one truth with absolute clarity: this was not the end. It was only the beginning.